So I'm going to read off my phone a little bit because that's where I keep all of my panel notes typically. So let me just get it here. Okay, so my name is Lilith Hurst. I am the author of The Face of the Marsh and the upcoming Distant Early Warning from Renaissance Press. Distant Early Warning is kind of what inspired me to do this panel because it's a near future climate apocalypse story. But I was always kind of seeing the apocalypse in a different way, and I wanted to talk to other people that maybe did too, because even though a lot of things have changed, um, there's Shannon. Unfortunately, there was unrest in the U.S. and my universe, and there was an attempted invasion, and there was kind of friction along the border and that kind of thing. It's set in Canada, but basically everybody's helping everybody else, or at least people are still people. There's some selfish people, there's some helpful people, but they're just people. And my pronouns are she, her. I'm just going to put that out there right now. Everybody state your pronouns. So we would like to acknowledge that this panel is hosted on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. Before I present our panelists, I just want to let everyone know that if you have a question, please use the Q&A function instead of the chat. We're using the chat to drop helpful links to people's work, so we just want to keep that at the top. So definitely use the Q&A if you want to say something. I will be leaving 15 minutes at the end of the panel to look at the top few questions. So that's how I tend to do it. And that's when the panel attendees will get to have their say. And we can also speak in the Discord room after the panel for any additional questions if people really want to get to us. And let's see if there's anything else I have here. Yes, don't forget to go to the vendors room, check out our panelist books, and if you enjoy what you hear, once again, we'll be in the Discord room at the end of the panel, most of us. And so at this point, I'm just going to give a note of my moderation. So I tend to let everybody go in turn when I've asked a question, and then we can have a little general discussion after that if we want to, and then I'll move on to the next question, just to make sure everybody has equal representation. So at this point, I'm going to invite the participants to introduce yourselves and state your pronouns and talk a little bit about your work. Shannon, why don't we start with you?
All right. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently in Brooklyn, as I said, on Not by Land, and my hometown, Pennacook, New Hampshire, which has shaped me as a writer and a person, is Pennacook Land. And you want a little bio, or?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So I'm a writer of mostly fantasy and some poetry, and I have a degree in creative writing / mythology and religion. And my first book is Beneath Blair Mountain. And I have other short story publications, including in Renaissance's Nothing Without Us anthology. And like I said, it's a very kind of apropos day to have this discussion with you guys. So I hope I have something interesting to add.
Awesome. Thank you. Madona.
Hi, my pronouns are she, her. So my name is Madona Skaff. I'd like to first acknowledge that I've grown up and lived on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I write science fiction and mystery, and I'm also the author of the Naya Investigate series, where my protagonist has MS, as do I. And the first book from Renaissance Press is A Journey of 1,000 Steps, where Naya searches for her missing friend. And the sequel is being actually launched this afternoon from Renaissance as well, and it's called Death by Association. And in this case, she goes after a triple murder, because why not? So I've also published several short stories. Most recently is the supernatural mystery Soul Behind the Face, which is in the anthology In the Key of 13, which is an anthology of music and murder, and also the story Backbone in the anthology Nothing Without Us, which features disabled characters who are the heroes, not the sidekicks. And I've also got 4 more mysteries in volumes 1 and 2 of The Whole Shebang, a mystery collection that's it's well, all these are actually in the vendors room, and you can check the links to order them if you're interested. And thank you.
Congratulations on the launch, Madonna. That's great. Kaitlin, let's go to you.
Hi, so my name is Kaitlin. This little guy is Atashi. And I just want to acknowledge first off that I currently live on the unceded land of the Algonquin, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee. So sorry about, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry about how I pronounce those. I grew up in Toronto, so that was on the unceded land of the Mississaugas and the Chippewa. I am a author with Renaissance Press. I have one book out with them called Life After Redby, which is a pre-apocalyptic immortal zombie horror thriller that goes into the apocalypse. And guys, this is not what I was expecting when I started writing about the apocalypse. So yeah, I'll be able to go into a little bit of that, where I can tell you how I saw the apocalypse coming with Redby and how it differs from what's actually happening around us. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So I like that we're already getting some people who sort of butted up against this vision of the apocalypse. That's great. So, all right, let's see. My first question. So I just want to read the panel description first, so that we all kind of have the same starting point. So, from what we've seen over the last few weeks, people in apocalyptic-like times are still just people, not characters out of an exaggerated and highly individualistic vision of the future, often touted in post-apocalyptic literature and video games. Our panelists discuss other visions for apocalyptic times. Okay, so I want to give credit where credit is due. This panel was largely inspired by Cory Doctorow. I read his latest book, Radicalized, recently, and The Mask of the Red Death was really, really interesting to me. I couldn't put it down. I think I read it in about 3-4 hours, because I was just, and it's a novella, it's fairly long, because he was really commenting on, in some ways, how flawed the individualist view of how to survive the apocalypse is. Essentially, he has a really selfish rich guy who walls himself up with 10 or 12 of his selfish rich friends in a bunker that's supposed to have everything, and the whole thing just goes, really fast. They get into a firefight, and a bunch of people get PTSD, and they get infected water, and they don't know how to deal with it, and they turn away people that could have actually helped them because they're not on the list. They're just it was really enlightening, and I couldn't find the Twitter thread because it was a really long time ago, and Cory posts a ton. But around late April, Cory did a really amazing Twitter thread about how doomsday preppers are just crashing and burning, in this situation, because and he explained it as, their whole worldview is kind of this fantasy where their specific skill is useful in the apocalypse. Like, they have a very specific vision of what it's going to be, and they're not flexibly prepared for anything it could be. And so it kind of revealed itself as this power fantasy, and people were kind of breaking down over it, which I just thought was the most fascinating thing, and I really wanted to talk about it in terms of our work and, the kind of tropes that we see in TV and media when it comes to the apocalypse. Mad Max comes to mind, various post-apocalyptic video games come to mind, so I'm going to check where I was going with this question. Yeah, so this got me thinking, why did we ever think that the decline of society would entail a bunch of Mad Max-style anarchistic biker action anyway? Like, why did we think that? What in our society made people think we wouldn't try to work together? Or are many post-apocalyptic stories really fantasies of selfish individualism, like Cory was saying? So I'm gonna go in the reverse order. I'm gonna start with Kaitlin to weigh in on this.
Okay, so first off, I want to just address the post-apocalyptic biker gangs thing, because that kind of is happening. Like, you look at these peaceful protesters who are going out right now, and they are trying to get a message across. They're trying to say something important, and meanwhile, there's people behind them breaking into, you know, the Quickie Mart. Like, the reason those kind of images come up is because we can't predict what everyone is going to do. Every single person is going to act individually. Some people are going to come together and work together properly. Some people are going to see this as basically the purge, where there are no laws anymore and you can just go out and do whatever you want. The thing I find is really important to a moment like this in our society is how structured things are, how hard we enforce certain rules. We as humans are a paradox. We need rules in order to function. We need something to follow. And we really hate having someone tell us to do something. There are some people who respond better to instructions, some people who need to be the ones doing the instructing, but we all organize ourselves around this concept that we are a community and we have to act together. Even when people go out and live on their own, they still need to have some sort of structure, follow some sort of regulation, and interact with, if not people, the animals or other things in their lives. We need communication of some kind. I was going to make a point with this, and now I'm back onto the biker gangs.
Keep on going.
But like the whole concept that, you know, everything is breaking down and everything's anarchy, it's not that it's anarchy, it's that we have reached a point where the rules that are in place are no longer rules that we feel we can follow, and so we say no, and when we say no, someone else says yes, and then it becomes this tug of war of, these are not restrictions I can live with, these are not restrictions I respect, therefore my community and people of like-minded people are going to go off and do this thing, and if you try to stop us, there's going to be problems. And this is something that's repeated over and over and over again in human history. We've reached a point where we haven't really had this sort of social explosion with the sort of technology that we have. We can now see all of these riots, all of these protests that are going on around the world. We see what's happening in Hong Kong right now, and it's infuriating so many people. But it also leaves this sense of helplessness, because we can only interact with what's going on in our backyard. So we see things we don't agree with. We see things that are saying, like, no, we can't live with these restrictions. And we can't really fly down to Hong Kong to, you know, take part in those protests. So we go into our own backyard and we wave our own flags and we burn our own things. And it's all kind of interconnected. It's this domino effect that's going on right now. And it's really interesting to see how each global situation is affecting the next one.
I think isolation has a large part to do with that too, because people are getting pent up. They really, really are. Like that's what I'm seeing at the grocery store, is that there's, and you know, I've had people that, like, I've had relatives. I had to block a relative on Facebook because they had gone from like normal nice person who was telling me how much they love my writing at Christmas this year to like making mean comments on every single post I posted for like a week. And like, I love this relative, but they're obviously very pent up for being indoors and they need a break, you know? And yeah, I mean, I think people are getting kind of wound up as well. But that was a really great response, Kaitlin. Thank you. Madona, let's go with you.
Well, yeah, that was a really great answer. And I'm trying to think how to fit in with that. I guess you're at, Elizabeth, you were talking about future scene bicycle gangs and things like that. I mean, at first I used to think, well, why is that going to happen? But then a few things have been happening. I mean, even not just recently, but when we had the big power failure and suddenly we were without any communications, like there was no electricity. So we realized we're stuck in the house because we can't get the car out. And like it took two of us to lift open the garage door. And then we had to leave the car out, which was kind of nerve-wracking, thinking, is it safe? And at first we had cell phones, but then, you know, those went down. And for a while we had the landlines, and then eventually they went down. So we were like basically trapped in the house, no power, and thinking, okay, well, luckily we have a barbecue that's charcoal, not propane. It doesn't need gas or anything. So we're good for food. And, you know, I'm thinking, okay, but never felt so isolated. And so I was thinking of like these Mad Max type futures. And I mean, at first I was thinking, well, it can't really happen. But now I realize, well, yes, it can, because all you need to do is shut off the electricity. And like the internet will follow soon after. And like generators are only going to go for so long. And so eventually you're going to get these gangs going around. But I think those would be, like maybe still being optimistic, but those will be the minority of people that are involved with the, you know, like the people that are out there looting. And I mean, okay, at the beginning of the pandemic, who understood why people were buying toilet paper? And apparently now the new toilet paper just a couple of weeks ago was seeds for planting vegetables, because everybody feared they're going to be growing vegetables. Now we have a garden every year, and we are like so stressed out. Can we get our tomatoes? And we got them, ordered them online, but they canceled the order. And so apparently now my husband came back from the store and he was saying, yeah, the new toilet paper are bicycles, because the weather's getting nice. And so it does kind of seem like you've become like every man for himself, or every woman for himself, or hi, Kat.
That's Ilsa?
Yeah. But I'm sort of hopeful that the majority of the people are still good people that work together. I mean, all our neighbors have, you know, worked together and helping each other. And I mean, you see that everywhere, strangers helping each other. You get the occasional crackpot at the grocery store or whatever, but you almost like you have to just ignore them and move on, you know.
Oh,
I don't know if
absolutely,
that's
yeah. And the gardening thing, yeah. I spent probably, I got everything eventually that I needed for the garden. I'd never done a garden before because I was worried about food security moving into the winter, you know, after seeing some of the shortages we had in the early spring. So I spent like a week online just finding any place that had this stuff. And eventually I just had to like go out to Walmart as soon as I could. Like as soon as the stores opened up, I was out at Walmart and I managed to like nab everything else at Walmart. But what a scramble. Yeah, it was really something. Shannon, let's hear what you have to say.
So I a couple of years ago actually was researching for a post-apocalyptic story, and I had a sort of similar feeling. I was watching like various documentaries about preppers to sort of like, you know, get ideas and such, and they were all prepared for such weirdly specific apocalypses, and like they didn't have a lot of things that were, you know, cover multiple situations, you know. And just here when, you know, the pandemic was starting and like everything was gone from the shelves, like a bunch of seemingly important things were left. Like people bought all the toilet paper, but like no one bought like feminine hygiene products, and it's like, I think you're gonna need those too. And I feel like that's sort of the problem with like post-apocalyptic fiction, is that we think of it as like, you know, this like movie with like the fingerless gloves and the biker gangs, and not like all of the normal trappings of life that you're going to run out of really quickly and need. And like sort of ability to like run a pantry and meal plan and like those sort of like clerical and soft skills, as you were, like those are going to be the people who survive, I think, instead of the, you know, big gun-toting lone wolf guy who's probably just going to get himself and other people killed. And also I was actually reading another post-apocalyptic story a while back that I'm a chronically ill person. So the story was sort of dealing with like both the end of the world and chronic illness is sort of a similar thing, because it's framed in the media as this sort of fight narrative, and you just need to, you know, be prepared and be a badass and it'll all be okay. And in both situations, it's just a lot of sort of waiting, you know, and like a lot of mundane little things that aren't exciting, you know, even if they're like big or momentous or terrifying. And I think like with the pandemic, that's really what's throwing off all of the like preppers, because they're prepared for like the last, you know, big zombie fight, not sitting around for 30 days staring at each other. You know, so like I feel like that disconnect in fiction and in the world around us is sort of becoming very apparent.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that occurred to me when the pandemic hit was just how much frugality was a skill. Like just regular old frugality was a skill that actually really fed into doing well in this pandemic. Like my husband and I are not rich, but we do a lot of things because then, you know, we paid off a lot of our student loans and whatever because we're super, super frugal. Like we make up meals that we're going to make ahead of time, and we have like a 90 to 95% like food usage rate in what we buy. Like we use everything we buy. We don't have any wastage. We make, you know, we make all our own food. You know, we do a lot of really frugal kind of do-it-yourself things, and when it came right down to it, that was really handy because we've been doing that for years.
Yeah.
So
I feel like intentional communities in post-apocalyptic fiction tend to get stuck in like the like cannibal cults, or the group that seems fine but something is terribly wrong. And I feel like it's people who have skills for like, you know, that kind of community that would actually do the best in, you know, the zombie apocalypse or whatever apocalypse you'd want. You
yeah,
know,
like let's not discount the knitters here. I think knitters are
exactly,
going to be
yes,
some of the most in-demand people.
gardening, irrigation, you know, all of those.
although, if we're looking at the old tropes of the apocalypse, I want those fingerless gloves, and I want Tina Turner.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on to the next question and see what we got here. Okay, so I think we've already kind of touched on this, but I wanted to dig a little deeper into it. What tropes in many post-apocalyptic stories have just never sat right to you, and why? I'm going to start with Madona.
Well, I guess one of the big ones is, I mean, maybe it's changing a bit now, but in a lot of the fiction, apocalyptic or or even pre-apocalyptic, it's always the evil scientists, you know, as a group, like they caused all these problems. And I mean, what was that book, Timescape, you know, by Gregory Benford? And basically, it was an ecological disaster that happened. And I think it's around 97, 98. And so they find a way to send a message back in time using tachyons and stuff. It's actually, if you're interested in hard SF, that's a pretty good book. So, and as they contact, I think back into the 60s to try and warn everybody to be careful. And so, I mean, that was good, that's fine. But then you get these others, which I can't actually think of an example now, where it's obviously the evil scientists, they cause all these problems and stuff. And I mean, I've always thought, I mean, I have a scientific background, I have a biology degree, I worked in mining research. And just to, like, I would blame it on the government that was in charge. And for example, not the previous, but quite far back, we had the Conservative Party that was just in power for way too long. And I found, like, when they finally left, I thought, okay, I feel like I have a breath of fresh air. I will feel like I'm embarrassed to say I'm a scientist if I go to a party or meet people. And I didn't feel like I was muzzled. And I thought it was just me, but then I heard several other friends that were in the science field. They said the same thing. Oh, now I can breathe, now I can talk. And so, and now we're seeing it again, like during the pandemic, where the scientists, the doctors, the experts, everybody's saying like vaccines work. You know, COVID-19 is very dangerous. And then you get one or two people that say, no, it's all a conspiracy. Then it spreads. Oh no, it's nothing. It's just like the flu. You know how many people die from the flu? It's not like the flu. And, you know, like, and it's just sort of things like that that sort of have bothered me. And it's sort of portrayed in fiction. And I'm finding that, you know, unless they really work on it, the scientists are usually the silent voice. And until there's a major disaster, they come in. Like 12 Monkeys. I mean, if anybody saw I don't know if there was a book on it, but the movie, that was the same sort of thing. Like it's way into the future. The scientists are kind of humanity's last resort, and maybe the governments are all gone. I don't know, but by this point, they're listening to the scientists. So that's one thing that I really has always bothered me. So, anyways, that's it.
No, that's a great point. Absolutely. And one I didn't even think of, because whenever I meet a scientist, I'm like, wow, you're way better at math than me.
Yeah, no, I went into biology. I'm not good at math, so.
Oh, okay. Oh, maybe it's over me.
Yeah.
All right, let's move to Shannon again.
Other than like the obvious, like everyone mysteriously has all of the hygiene products that they need, you know, and then, like everybody's waxing in between like killing zombies or dying of the plague. That's like my pet peeve with the genre, but also
and nobody's gained any weight.
Exactly, yes. And for some reason everybody has all the contraception they need. But sort of the thing that like as a reader always sort of stuck out to me is that like even with like big massive scale things, everything kind of doesn't really end like at once. Like in post-apocalyptic, you know, media, there's very much like the minute everything kind of shit hits the fan, and then after that it's just, you know, wandering the post-apocalyptic abyss in your biker jacket. And like things would break down unevenly and not all at the same time. Like I'm from originally a rural area, and people like there have, you know, like deer freezers full of meat, and so it's going to take a lot longer for them to run out of food and start, you know, cannibalizing each other than like, you know, here might. And also I think that kind of like someone joked to me one time that like, you know, what if in the Hunger Games, because we only see like North America, everyone else in the world is still just totally fine, and they're just like, hey, have you seen America lately? Because you know, lots of places in the world are seemingly post-apocalyptic right now, and we're still here having this conversation. And so, you know, when things would be completely going to hell in a handbasket, you know, maybe for us, there's probably someone else out there being like, oh yeah, I heard about that. That sounds bad. And that sort of uneven, you know, distribution of apocalypse, I guess, I think sort of shows that the genre is very much like an escapist fantasy, but it's an escapist fantasy for a very particular kind of person. Like in The Walking Dead, everybody gets to like walk around with guns and be cool and wander the earth, but like all of the women in like the background of some of the episodes are like still having to wash everybody's clothes, you know? And it's like, yeah, so everybody's cool and free and, you know, being awesome, except all the women doing the laundry, and we're just, you know, ignoring that, like, because that's very much not an escapist fantasy for me, having to do the laundry for like 16 fellow zombie fighters.
Yeah, I think if the apocalypse ever moved in, you know, in that style of apocalypse, it would become apparent very fast that I wasn't washing anybody's undies.
But if your brain spatter on them, that's gonna take a while to get out.
Exactly. That's a skill set, and we should respect the artisans that are able to get zombie brains out of clothing. Just on one note, I think on that note, I actually really liked the way the extended edition of Stephen King's The Stand did the apocalypse, because it was fairly abrupt how everything happened with Captain Trips, but like that was of course a pandemic apocalypse again, and I liked it because he spent probably, as I remember it, 150 pages just chronicling the downslide of, you know, society from, oh, this isolated thing is happening over here, to, you know, people are starting to panic, to general chaos, to, you know, rogue army factions, and it kind of just, he shows the whole downhill slide, and it's a little bit of kind of what you're talking about, Shan, I think. Even though it still kind of gets to the point where fairly quickly where everything is destroyed. Kaitlin.
So I'm basically going to bounce off the other 2 points that they made, because like the big thing that bothers me about post-apocalyptic media, movies, whatever else, is how it happens in a day. Like one day society is fine, everything's beautiful. The next day, zombies, fires, and death everywhere. Which, as we can see from what's going on around us, like COVID-19 started, the first case was reported back in November, I want to say. And it spread across the world, but it took months and months for anyone to even begin to lock down and start dealing with it. And I think this is due to the fact that humans have a really, really impressive ability to ignore things they don't like. And honestly, I want to say, when I was writing Rebbe, the one thing I did not think I would need to include, I didn't even imagine this was becoming a part of it, was people just outright ignoring that there's a problem and just acting like it's business as usual, and whatever's going on over there is not actually my deal, therefore it doesn't exist. And I think this stems from the fact that humans have the ability to rationalize basically anything to fit into their worldview. I think that's where we're getting a lot of these theories, like COVID-19 isn't real, and the protesters are paid actors, and everything like that. It's people needing to rationalize what they're seeing, like what they're actively seeing with their own eyes, hearing with their own ears, as something that cannot be real because it doesn't fit into their worldview. And so when it comes to the apocalypse, the idea that everyone on like the drop of a hat just immediately, okay, this is a problem, this is affecting me, panic and outrage everywhere across the world, is not really realistic to me. I think it would be more realistic if it kind of does the slow burn that we got going on right now, where it takes a long time for people to even acknowledge it. And these, you know, zombie hunter people traveling across the country, they go like from little pocket to little pocket of society where, you know, they've reestablished whatever kind of order they have, but they never really encounter anything that looks like the way society used to be. And I think there should be at least a few communities that are like, nope, we're fine, everything's fine, nothing is going wrong. Have you seen what's on the internet? Here's a cat meme. And like, just outright denial, because I think that's a very strong part of how humanity operates.
Yeah, kind of like that community in The Giver, if you ever read The Giver, where, yeah, they're kind of going on like society. The Giver is essentially a YA novel, very dark YA novel, where one child is chosen out of this community to receive the truth psychically about what happened to the world. And he's like a storyteller and a knowledge giver for the community called The Giver. And essentially the main character finds out that this carefully curated community he lived in that was very, very, you know, squeaky clean and very religious actually was one of the last bastions in a nuclear wasteland. And he runs away at the end. You don't know whether he dies or whether he finds another town. Which was, it's like it's a really, really dark book, but it's for YA, but it's actually really good. I never forgot it. So it is time for Q&A. So let's go over to the Q&A forum and see what people are asking. Ooh, we got a great question right up at the top from JD Deluzio. Is the recent historical increase in apocalyptic literature and media making us more or less likely to cope with difficult or even apocalyptic circumstances? Love it, JD. All right, Kaitlin, let's start with you.
So basically it's asking like if the prevalence of this post-apocalyptic literature is making us more able to deal with it?
Yeah, more or less able to deal with it. You know, is it prepping us for the apocalypse, or is it kind of letting us down?
Honestly, I think it's kind of letting us down. It's like the superhero surge that came a couple years back, kind of still ongoing, where we are in a position where we need someone to take over and be a leader and be a superhero and just make everything right again. And so we like take in all this wonderful, beautiful literature about these big, powerful heroes who can just go out there and bring justice to the world, and everything's fine and perfect and beautiful because of that. And post-apocalyptic literature is kind of doing the same thing. It's feeding into the fantasy that we were talking about earlier, where we have all these doomsday preppers who are stockpiling canned food and guns and saying, you know, if the apocalypse comes, I can protect me and mine and everything like that. But at the end of the day, they're not actually developing skills that would be useful in the apocalypse. And I think part of that is largely due to the fact that we have this literature that says when the apocalypse comes, put on your fingerless gloves, put on your biker jacket, go out there and smash some zombie heads, and you'll be a hero and everything will be fine.
To kind of add on to that, it's interesting because it seems like a lot of the people who are most sort of like living in that prepper headspace are the ones who were the least prepared here. And like, not just because it wasn't the apocalypse they expected, but also I mentioned earlier sort of seeing like the connections between like the experience of like being diagnosed with an illness and the end of the world. Because you really see like the same attitude of like when it's like, hey, so this exists now, people are like, oh, it'll be fine, you know, we'll take two and be a functional society in the morning. And like all these people who just can't deal with the fact that like the pandemic exists. And it doesn't matter if you want to go to your, like, you know, graduation or have like a dinner party or go to, you know, Walmart, you can't. And the like idea of explaining to people that it doesn't matter if it's unfair or hard or they don't want it, it is something that's really hard to get through to people. Like we were talking about earlier about the people who would just be like, oh, there isn't a zombie apocalypse. And so like in the traditional, you know, post-apocalyptic story frame, I'm probably the person who's not going to survive because I'm like, you know, a chronically ill person who doesn't have a lot of upper body strength. But I'm weirdly equipped for this apocalypse because I have a lot of the skills of like planning ahead for a bunch of scenarios that I have to be prepared for that may or may not happen. And also I have a lot of experience with just sort of waiting and trying to figure out what's going to happen and what I need to use energy on and what I need to not use energy on, instead of using like all of my guns and energy on day one, like, you know, manifest destinying my little apocalypse compound. Like, so.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that, you know, when you have a disability, it's also a lot easier to have that mindset of this isn't ideal and this is inconvenient to me, but it just is.
Yeah, accepting that reality exists even if it's not fair is a life skill that I thought more people had, and this year is making it very apparent that they do not.
Yeah, that's a great point for sure.
Yeah,
Madona, let's move to you.
Yeah, just want to say, like, I guess most of the literature, I mean, that you read, you're not going to be reading like reality type thing. It's got to be some drama. So yeah, you put on your fingerless gloves, get on your motorcycle, and, you know, get those zombies. But I mean, seeing what's happening now, like, as I guess Kaitlin, everybody said that, like, this all happens slowly. And so it's not quite the apocalypse we thought, how, you know, we've seen in fiction. Although there's been, I was trying to remember, like I read this one book, it's a YA, Life as We Knew It, by Susan Pfeffer, I think. Anyways, she, the protagonist is a young girl, she's 16 in high school, and they're all out on the street waiting to see an asteroid hit the moon, and she's thinking, oh, well, all the, you know, moon getting hit by an asteroid is just an excuse for teachers to give us more homework. But how it happened was it was denser than they thought, so it shifted the moon just slightly out of orbit, and enough it caused all this, like almost literally overnight, of all, well, the tsunamis and like coastal cities and islands, everybody was flooded, started with the, you know, the volcanoes and earthquakes happening. And they were in a small town, but they were far enough away, like maybe about a mile or so out. And most of it was how they managed to survive. And like the mother comes in and grabs kids out of the school and takes them to the grocery store and say, okay, we're only allowed $100 worth of stuff. Go in, fill it up, come back, unload. You know, so she grabbed everybody, did all the stuff. And then the rest of the book was how they were coping, basically being isolated when winter came, I think in August or something. And you know, all their survival skills. So that was sort of drama and a bit more realistic. And I think that those kind of books would prepare you for something where all of a sudden people can't, oh yeah, that was the other thing. They weren't able to get food to resupply grocery stores because all the train tracks and the buses, and they were out of fuel. They weren't able to come to get the fuel. And like, I mean, in this case, we have an overabundance of oil, but yeah, so it's just, sometimes I guess you have to almost pick and choose, but again, like you need the knitters and you need the like all those other small things, like how to repair things and how to start a fire. Like, those are the type of people you need to have, and the guns are only going to help so much. So.
I personally volunteer to teach people how to knit socks.
Actually interesting. I read a zombie novel one time when I was working actually at a Shaker village, which the Shakers were a, like 18th and 19th century religious movement. And the like post-apocalyptic village that had reformed in this, you know, end of the world scenario used like Shaker terminology for their buildings. And so it was really weird reading, like, you know, in this, when people are gone for the day and I'm like waiting for my ride, like ghost town, and then like the book like has basically like the same setting but with zombies. And it was, you know, really interesting because I feel like people like the Shakers would have had a really good shot at the apocalypse because they had, you know, large pantries and knitters, and they were prepared for everything, and they had good distribution of labor, and, you know, that sort of chore sharing sort of skills, again, I think are gonna make or break whether or not your post-apocalyptic community becomes like the cannibal cult or like a nice little village.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that in order to be flexible enough for any potential apocalypse, we actually need to look at the Victorians. You know, we need to go back to when people were less reliant on technology and kind of look at the techniques of what they did, you know, and how they survived. I mean, probably a book about Victorian people or you know, something educational about those times would actually be more useful. Even medieval times would be more useful than
like historian skill shares. I feel like are going to be a much bigger part of the apocalypse than, like, you know, driving around in trucks with 50 guns.
Yeah.
On here, how all these post-apocalyptic video games and TV shows and everything all happen in the summer. Nothing in there is about preparing you for the winter.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It always happens in places that either don't have winter or aren't having winter now. And what are they doing to prepare for winter? They're not really. You know, that's another good point about the trope. I'm going to duck back into the Q&A for one more question, just for the last 5 minutes, and hopefully we can answer it fairly quickly, each of us, and get an answer from everyone. Okay, so I love this one. Talia is asking, who defines what anarchy is in the context of an apocalypse? Is it just a way to discredit other ways of doing things and managing when things go off the rail for the established order? Love that. That's one we haven't hit on at all. Have we started with Madona lately? Let's start with Madona.
I think anarchy, I mean, in some cases, it's probably good, but, you know, especially like if you're trying to overthrow a government. So, I mean, in Hong Kong, I wouldn't call that anarchy, if you want to look at it that way. But I think that's actually a very good question. I think one way to think about it is that, sorry, if you hear funny noises, my dog has allergies and she's coughing on the floor. Sorry. Anyways, she's, what was I saying? Oh my goodness. I lost my train of thought. Okay, so for anarchy, I was thinking, I mean, like when you have an apocalypse or some kind of a disaster, you have to have people working together to try to get everybody to survive, even if it's just to get your family unit to survive or your village or your town. And I would see anarchy as being those that are basically like the looters, that they're just really running around grabbing stuff. And like in that book I mentioned, the Life as We Knew It, there were looters going in and stealing TV sets. And, you know, dude, we have no power, so what's that going to do for you? And, you know, it was like, so that I would explain, or I would see as more anarchy, that you're really thinking you're helping, but you're in the end just basically working your way to dying and taking as many people as you can with you. That's my 2 cents. So.
Thank you. Let's do Shannon.
Yeah, so harkening back to what I touched on earlier about, you know, it not necessarily being the apocalypse for everyone at the same time, I feel like that is something that would be really apparent, you know, because like the fall of the Roman Empire was an apocalypse for a huge amount of people, and then there were people who didn't particularly feel it all that much, and then there were people who didn't even notice, and so, you know, I feel like any apocalyptic scenario, you know, no matter how like big or small or like how world changing, you know, it's not going to hit everyone evenly. And also some people are probably going to come out on top and end up better than they were. And other people, you know, will end up much worse than they were. And, you know, it's not just on a single day, everyone just packs up in their RV and leaves. So, and also, you know, I just feel like the amount of, like, there's lots of people like taking like very brooding road trips in the post-apocalypse, but there isn't a lot of like the boring clerical parts of like the refugee experience, you know, because like you'll still have to fill out paperwork in the apocalypse because they had paperwork in like, you know, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. And so it's going to be a lot of, again, that sort of mundane waiting around for stuff, not just, you know, walking into the sunset and awaiting the inevitable apocalypse that just, you know, got dropped like an album.
I agree. If we had cuneiform paperwork, we're screwed for paperwork for the rest of our lives. Kaitlin?
So to me, the concept of anarchy is a complete lack of rules, which, harkening back to my first point about us as a society needing rules, we need something to follow, we need someone to lead. It's no wonder that anarchy absolutely terrifies us, because it means a complete lack of any kind of direction, and oh my god, this is the definition of freedom, where there are no limitations, and we do not know how to deal with that. But I think anarchy is just, it's a phase that we go through in order to develop new rules. It is very, very scary. So people go, oh my goodness, and they band together and they make their own rules. We don't want that anarchy. We're going to make our own society over here. Then in the post-apocalyptic society where, you know, anarchy rules, which it can't because it's lack of rules, which is, it's like the anarchy party. It can't actually exist. But there's, you know, all these different little societies with their own sets of rules. So people who are not belonging to any single one of those communities say anarchy is in charge right now because nothing is the same anywhere I go. And we really, really like sameness. Mm-hmm. We go to a McDonald's in Toronto, it's the same as going to a McDonald's in New York. We really, really like things to be the same and to know exactly what we're going to get out of a day. So having all those little societies where they're not all the same rules kind of still gives people that sense of there's anarchy right now and it doesn't sit right. It's giving me the funny feelings in my stomach that I don't like. So I think it's a necessary thing. I also think it's not as scary as people think it is, because it's just a phase that we will go through. It is not ever going to be anarchy exists and that is all there is anymore.
And also I think how scary it is depends on like how much the status quo is serving you. Because if you have nothing to lose, then it's like, yeah, burn it all to the ground. Yeah. And if you have everything to lose, it's like, no, we can't stop manufacturing zombies. or something.
There's some guy living in his cabin in the woods going, huh, guess there's a fire over there. Oh, well, I'm going to go cook some jerky. Like,
Exactly.
So,
Actually,
sorry.
the story that I mentioned researching in the beginning, it actually was about an intentional community before the apocalypse that actually misses the apocalypse. Like they start to notice things are weird, so they go out to like find out what's going on, and then they realize they just missed a nuclear apocalypse. And like I feel like the amount of people who would just not notice the apocalypse, like we were talking about earlier, you know, even if they like were willing to believe it, they just didn't get the memo.
Yeah, brunch happened and they got distracted.
Exactly.
Oh,
I saw an NPR article about it, but I didn't actually read it.
Sorry?
I just saw the people who are like, oh yeah, I saw like an article about that, but then I didn't read it.
No, thank you guys for the wonderful conversation. We're a little bit over time, so I'm just going to wrap everything up. This was amazing. When I had the idea for this panel, I had no idea it was going to be this awesome. So thank you, Shannon. It was lovely meeting you. I just said, let's go into the chat, and if anybody has more questions or wants to repeat the questions that didn't get touched on in the Q&A, we'll be happy to address those there. Thank you.
Thank you.
all right.